I was watering my hydrangeas when I heard my son Mark and his wife whispering in the kitchen. Their voices were sharp, cutting through the calm of my Tuesday morning. "She's sitting on a gold mine and we're struggling," his wife hissed. "It's time. She won't even notice a few legal papers." I felt a chill despite the Ohio sun. The sound was like a drawer clicking shut, locking away something precious. An hour later, Mark sat at my table, smiling, pushing a stack of papers toward me. "Just a formality for my new business, Mom. Sign here." My hand, steady for 78 years, now felt like a stranger's as I held the pen. The kitchen table, the same one where I checked his homework and celebrated his birthdays, felt enormous and cold. The scent of coffee couldn't mask the acrid smell of deceit I suddenly recognized. But this was Mark, my only son, the boy I taught to balance his first checkbook. I pushed the doubt away. It was an ugly, disloyal feeling. "What is this exactly?" I asked, my voice betraying none of the tremor I felt inside. "It's for the new startup, Mom, Evotech. We're about to land a huge government contract, but we need to show solid financials. This just aligns some of your assets with the company's for a short period. A legal maneuver. The lawyer said it's standard procedure." He spoke with an easy confidence that I had once admired. Now it felt rehearsed. I looked at the top page. Durable power of attorney. The word stood out in stark, bold print. A feeling of dread, cold and heavy, settled in my stomach. I'd spent 40 years as a bookkeeper for a small manufacturing firm. I knew what these words meant. They meant control, absolute control. But to question him felt like an accusation, a failure of a mother's trust. Maybe things were different now in the world of business, more complex. "What is this exactly?" I asked, my voice betraying none of the tremor I felt inside. "It's for the new startup, Mom, Evotech. We're about to land a huge government contract, but we need to show solid financials. This just aligns some of your assets with the company's for a short period. A legal maneuver. The lawyer said it's standard procedure." He spoke with an easy confidence that I had once admired. Now it felt rehearsed. I looked at the top page. Durable power of attorney. The words stood out in stark, bold print. A feeling of dread, cold and heavy, settled in my stomach. I'd spent 40 years as a bookkeeper for a small manufacturing firm. I knew what these words meant. They meant control, absolute control. But to question him felt like an accusation, a failure of a mother's trust. Maybe things were different now in the world of business, more complex. So I signed. My signature, once a mark of precision and certainty, was a shaky scrawl on the dotted line. He immediately gathered the papers, his movements a little too quick, a little too eager. He kissed my cheek, a dry, fleeting touch, and was gone. The front door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was deafening. I sat at the table for a long time, the scent of his cheap cologne lingering in the air, a nauseating perfume of betrayal I hadn't quite fully accepted. That this was Mark, my only son, the boy I'd taught to balance his first checkbook. I pushed the doubt away. It was an ugly, disloyal feeling. My hydrangeas, visible through the kitchen window, seemed to droop in the afternoon heat. Or maybe they were just wilting under the weight of my foolishness. In that moment, I wasn't a meticulous bookkeeper or a strong matriarch. I was just an old woman who would let her love for her son blind her to the truth. And that, I feared, was a mistake from which there was no recovery.
3 weeks passed in a haze of feigned normalcy. Mark would call, his voice breezy and cheerful, talking about meetings and projections for Evotech. He never mentioned the papers I'd signed. I tried to believe him, to convince myself that my instincts were just the paranoid ramblings of an old woman. But a bookkeeper's mind is a restless thing. It seeks balance. My world felt dangerously out of balance. The unease finally solidified into a decision on a Thursday morning at 10:17 a.m. I was at my local bank, the same one I'd used for 50 years, to withdraw some cash for the farmer's market. Mrs. Gable, a kind teller who had known me since her pigtail days, greeted me with a warm smile. "The usual, Eleanor?" she asked. "Yes, please, dear," I said, handing her my withdrawal slip. She typed my information into her computer, and her smile faltered. Her brow furrowed. "Eleanor, there seems to be an issue. The account balance isn't sufficient for this." I felt a cold prickle on my neck. "That's not possible. Check the savings account. There should be over $350,000 in there." She typed again, her movements slow and hesitant. She turned the monitor toward me, her expression a mixture of pity and confusion. "The account was closed out 3 days ago, Eleanor. A single wire transfer for $350,000. The world tilted. The fluorescent lights of the bank seemed to hum with a malevolent energy. My breath caught in my chest. Who authorized the transfer?" Mrs. Gable wouldn't meet my eyes. She pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "The transfer was authorized by the power of attorney on file, Mark Peters." Mark. It wasn't a stranger or a hacker. It was my son. The carefully constructed wall of denial I had built around myself crumbled into dust. He hadn't just needed to align assets. He had liquidated them. He had taken everything, my entire life savings, the money my late husband and I had painstakingly put away, the security for my final years, all gone in a single cold digital transaction. That afternoon I called him. My hand was perfectly steady now. The trimmer was gone, replaced by a glacial comb. When he answered, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mark, the savings account is empty." There was a brief silence, then a sigh, laced with an annoyance that infuriated me more than any lie could. "Mom, you weren't supposed to find out like that. I was going to tell you. The business needed a sudden capital injection. It's an investment. You'll get it all back with interest." "You stole my life savings." "Don't be so dramatic," he snapped, his voice turning hard. "It's business, something you're too old to understand. You signed the papers. It's all perfectly legal. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run." He hung up. "Too old to understand." The words echoed in the silent house. He thought I was a doddering old fool, a relic to be managed and ultimately plundered. He saw my age as a weakness, my trust as a tool. He had made a fatal error. He forgot that for 40 years my entire professional life was built not on trust, but on verification, on ledgers and receipts, on the immutable truth of numbers, and I had a record of everything.
That night, sleep was an impossibility. Mark's words, "too old to understand," played on a loop in my mind, not with the sting of an insult, but with the clarion call of a challenge. He had declared war, assuming his opponent was unarmed. But my weapons weren't in a safe or a bank vault. They were in the attic, gathering dust, waiting. At 2 a.m., with the moon casting long shadows across the floorboards, I climbed the creaking attic stairs. The air was thick with the scent of cedar and thyme. In the far corner, under a canvas sheet, were 4 heavy steel filing cabinets, my personal archives. For 40 years, I hadn't just been a bookkeeper for a firm. I had been the bookkeeper of my own life. Every major financial event, every loan, every gift, every promise, it was all documented.
My late husband, David, used to call it my obsession. "Why write it all down, Ellie?" he'd ask gently. "It's family." I'd smile and say, "Numbers don't have emotions. It's good to have a record." I never imagined I'd one day use it against my own son. I pulled out a specific drawer, the one labeled Mark 1990 Present. Inside were dozens of cloth-bound ledgers, their pages filled with my precise, elegant script. I ran my fingers over them, each one a chapter in a story of misplaced generosity. Here was the $5,000 loan for his first car, never repaid. Here was the $20,000 gift to help with the down payment on his house, the house he and his wife now whispered in. And here, in a ledger from 10 years ago, was the seed of my salvation. He had started his first business then, a disastrous venture into online retail. He needed a cosigner for a substantial business loan. I had refused. But I did help him secure a smaller, private loan through an old family friend. What Mark never knew was that the agreement I had drafted, the one he had signed without a second glance, contained a very specific clause. Clause 7B. It stipulated that any future financial malfeasance or exploitation involving family assets would trigger a default, not just on the original loan, but would also attach a lien to any and all of his personal and corporate assets. It was a just-in-case clause, a bookkeeper's paranoia. He called it boring legal stuff then, too. Now it was a ticking bomb he had just armed himself. A calm, icy resolve settled over me. He thought the battle was over, won by a single signature. He didn't realize it had just begun. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about respect. It was about proving that my 78 years were a source of wisdom, not a sign of weakness. I brought the ledgers downstairs. I spent the rest of the night at my kitchen table, a single lamp cutting through the darkness. With a first pot of coffee and a new legal pad, I began to work. I cross-referenced dates, amounts, and broken promises. I wasn't a heartbroken mother anymore. I was Eleanor Peters, bookkeeper. And I was about to conduct the most important audit of my life. My son had forgotten my profession. I was about to give him a very, very detailed reminder.
2 days later, at exactly 9 a.m., I walked into the downtown offices of Sterling and Finch, my lawyers. I didn't call Mark to warn him. The first rule of a successful audit is to never alert the subject. Mr. Finch, a man who had handled my husband's estate with quiet competence, looked over my ledgers, his eyebrows rising higher with each page. He looked at the original loan agreement with Clause 7B. A slow smile spread across his face. "This is ironclad, Eleanor," he said, his voice a low hum of appreciation. "This is meticulous." Our first move was quiet and devastating. We filed an emergency injunction, presenting the power of attorney document alongside the loan agreement and my ledger detailing years of financial support and the final massive withdrawal. A judge, seeing the clear pattern of exploitation, granted it immediately. The order wasn't just freeze Mark's personal accounts. Thanks to Clause 7B, it extended to every asset tied to Evotech. We had cut off his oxygen supply. The call came at 4:32 p.m. It wasn't a breezy check-in. It was a choked, panicked roar. "What did you do? My accounts are frozen. All of them. The company's accounts, too. We have payroll tomorrow. What the hell did you do?" "I'm conducting an audit, Mark. It appears there are some significant discrepancies in the family accounts dating back several years." "You can't do this. I'll sue you. The power of attorney—" His voice trailed off.
a flicker of uncertainty finally entering his tone. The power of attorney was the final transaction in a long pattern of financial exploitation, which triggered a default based on an agreement you signed on August 14th, 10 years ago, Clause 7B. You should read your contracts more carefully. There was a stunned silence. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head, the dawning horror as he realized he had been outmaneuvered not by some corporate raider, but by his own mother from her quiet suburban home. "This is insane," he finally sputtered. "You're ruining me over some ancient paperwork?" "You were ruined the moment you saw me as a bank account instead of your mother. You have two options. You can return the $350,000 with interest, along with full repayment of all documented outstanding loans from my ledger by noon tomorrow, or we proceed with litigation for fraud and elder abuse. Your choice." I hung up the phone. I didn't feel a surge of triumph, not yet. Just the quiet, firm satisfaction of a balance sheet. I had placed a weight on one side of the scale, and now it was his turn to make it right. I walked into the kitchen and put on a kettle for tea. Through the window, I could see my hydrangeas, standing tall and vibrant. I had been watering them dutifully. An asset, I thought to myself, should always be properly cared for. He had forgotten that simple, fundamental rule, and now the bill was due.
The next morning, at 11:48 a.m., a wire transfer appeared in my account. The amount was precise: $417,231.42. It was the $350,000 plus the outstanding loans plus accrued interest calculated to the day. My son knew my standards. Mr. Finch had the injunction lifted an hour later, but the damage to Evotech was done. Without access to capital at a critical moment, their big government contract had vanished. So had their investors. Mark's company imploded less than a month later. He came to the house once after that. He didn't yell. He looked smaller, diminished. He asked, his voice hollow, why I had done it. "You said I was too old to understand. You were wrong. I understood perfectly. I understood that you saw my love as a resource to be drained and my trust as a loophole to be exploited. I didn't do this to ruin you, Mark. I did it to reclaim myself." He had no reply. He turned and left, and I knew that whatever relationship we'd had was now just another entry in a closed ledger. There was a sadness to it, a finality that ached in a place deep inside me, but it wasn't a destructive grief. It was the quiet, necessary pain of an amputation, of removing something that had become toxic. In the months that followed, a strange peace settled over me. The silence in the house was no longer lonely, it was serene. I found a new purpose. I started a small, pro bono consultancy service from my kitchen table, helping other seniors in my community navigate their finances. I taught them how to read the fine print, how to set up protected accounts, how to recognize the subtle language of exploitation even when it came from those they loved. I called it the Ledger Foundation. My ledgers, once a private obsession, were now tools of empowerment for others. My meticulous nature, which Mark had seen as a quaint quirk of old age, became a shield for dozens of people. I realized that my strength had never left me. It had just been dormant, filed away, waiting for the right moment to be withdrawn. I had spent a lifetime balancing accounts for others. In the end, the most important account I ever had to balance was my own. An account of self-worth, respect,
and the quiet, unshakable power of a woman who knows her numbers. And finally, everything was in its proper column, and the bottom line was simple and clear. I was at peace.